Now let's talk about functions. Function is a group of related statements that perform specific tasks. Functions help break our program into smaller and modular chunks. As our program grows larger and larger, functions make it more organized and manageable. Moreover, it avoids repetition and makes the code reusable. Function definitions consist of the following components. Keyword def that marks the start of the function header. Function name to uniquely identify the function. Function naming follows the same rules as writing identifiers. Next is arguments through which we pass values to function. They are optional. Colon to mark the end of the function header. Optional documentation string to describe what the function does. One or more valid Python statements that make up the function body. Statements must have the same indentation level. And finally, optional return statement to return value from the function. On the slide, you can see the function which greets to person passed in parameter. Once we have defined a function, we can call it from another function, program, or even the Python prompt. To call function, we simply put function name with appropriate parameters. Return statement is used to exit function and go back to the place from where it was called. This statement can contain expressions that gets evaluated and the value is returned. If there is no expression in the statement or the return statement itself is not present inside the function, then the function will return none object. Function in this code snippet returns the absolute value of the entered number. Scope of variable is portion of program where variable is recognized. Parameters and variables defined inside function are not visible from outside the function. It means they have local scope. The lifetime of variable is the period throughout which variable exists in the memory. The lifetime of variables inside function is as long as the function executes. Here is an example to illustrate the scope of variable inside function. On the other hand, variables outside the function are visible from inside. They have global scope. We can read these values from inside the function, but cannot change them. In order to modify the value of variables outside the function, they must be declared as global variables using keyword global. Let's go through function arguments topic 2. If we call function with different number of arguments, the interpreter will show error message. On the slide you can see call of function with no arguments along with respective error message. Function arguments can have default values. We can provide default value to argument by using assignment operator. Here is example. In this function, the parameter name doesn't have default value, and it's mandatory during a call. On the other hand, parameter message has default value, so it's optional during a call. If value is provided, it will override the default value. Any number of arguments in function can have default value. But once we have default argument, all arguments to its right must also have default values. So non-default arguments cannot follow default arguments. For example, if we had defined the function header as on the third image, we would get error. When we call function with some values, these values get assigned to the arguments according to their position. Python allows function to be called using keyword arguments. When we call functions in this way, the position of arguments can be changed. Calls on the slide are all valid and produce the same result. As we can see, we can mix positional arguments with keyword arguments. But we must keep in mind that keyword arguments must follow positional arguments. Having positional argument after keyword argument will result in error. Example is demonstrated in the last image. Sometimes we don't know in advance the number of arguments that will be passed. Python allows us to handle this kind of situation through arbitrary number of arguments. In the function definition, we use asterisk before the parameter name to denote this kind of argument. Here is example. This function greets all the people in the names parameter. So we have called the function with multiple arguments. These arguments get wrapped up into tuple before being passed into the function. Inside the function, we use for loop to retrieve all the arguments.